Greetings, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Communities Scrutiny Commission. We've got a very full agenda today, so I'm going to kick off straight away with item 1, which is which I've not even got up in front of me. Bronwyn, help me out. This is the welcome we've done. Item 2 is apologies.
Yes, we have no apologies from the Community Scrutiny Commission. However, we have a joint item with the Growth and Regeneration Commission, and we've had 4 apologies. That's Councillors Mark Weston, Mark Bradshaw, Tom Brooks and Fabian Breckles.
Thank you very much. Well, welcome to everyone from Growth and Regen. I hope you're going to find the first item interesting. Bronwyn, can we make a note that I'm going to have a word with all the whips about attendance and not giving apologies. It's happening too often. So the next item is declarations of interest from anyone. No, that's good to hear or not to hear. Next item is item 4, which is the minutes from pages 6 to 12. To make it easy, has anyone got any items on the minutes that on the last minutes that they're concerned about? I haven't, but I wondered if anybody else had seen anything they didn't like. Okay, I'll take that the minutes are accepted and I will sign them appropriately. Item 5 is the action tracker. Again, I have no queries with that, but obviously for the record, it should be noted that the Bristol Impact Fund item is still not completely finished, and we'll hold that one over. Has anyone else any comments on that item? Thank you very much. I did say I was going to race through this, and I certainly am. The next item is the chair's business, and I wanted just to say that we've got an incredibly full meeting today. I've never known so many questions and statements, and I've never known such long answers, I have to say. So I don't know whether to be pleased or not, but we've got to move pretty fast on all this. I'm assuming that everyone's read the papers. I've told the officers that everyone's read the papers. Therefore, the officers are doing a very short presentation. I would ask you, please, for us to get through this rapidly, if you can keep your questions short, and I'll ask for the answers to be kept short. That way we can generate a lot more questions and hopefully get more done. So please, if we can do that. I think that's all I wanted to say at this stage. So I'll go straight on to item 6, which is, item 7, which is the public forum. There's only one item that doesn't relate specifically to a point, and that's question 1 from Suzanne Audrey. Is Ms. Audrey in the waiting room, please?
I'm not just in the waiting room, I'm actually in the meeting.
Oh, well, welcome. I'm sorry, there's so many faces here, I couldn't spot you. Suzanne, would you like to ask your, you've had your answers, would you like to ask your supplementary questions, please?
Well, I would, but I'm not sure whether John Wellington is here because, although Tim is.
He is here.
I can see Tim is here. So my supplementary would be, Tim, do you think that the Mayor was right when he said that your working party didn't take the council's finances into consideration when you made the recommendation to open the pool?
John, before you answer that question, can I just say it's quite unusual for a forum, for a commission member to be asked a question. Are you happy to take that question? John, are you happy to?
I wasn't prepared to respond to it, so I'd rather not do that in a public forum. But if Suzanne, if you want to get in touch with me, as you know, you're happy to answer any questions via email or any other medium.
Yeah, I can see that Tim is here, and I didn't know whether when he waved his hand, he was saying also that he didn't want to get involved in this. Or
Suzanne.
Tim, do you want to?
Anthony,
Oh.
sorry, can I just chip in here? Tim's not a member of Community Scrutiny, so I don't think it would be appropriate for him to answer. He was a member, but because of numbers, he stood down. I think he's here representing Growth and Regen. Am I right about that, Tim?
That's correct. Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
And I thank you for your intervention, Joe. That was very useful. Thank you very much. So I think for the record, Suzanne, let's have both of your supplementary questions, and I will put John on honour to answer them. And I'd like to see a copy, if I may, John, please, of your responses.
What, me?
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
You're being asked the questions. I mean, if you want to refer those questions to other members of the working group to whom they're being addressed, I'd be more than happy for that. But we have a member of the public who's asking a question. I think we should find a way of answering it.
Of course, yeah, and she has received a response, and I'm happy to respond on behalf of John Wellington. But if she wants answers on behalf of the council, then that's a different thing, isn't it?
Suzanne?
Okay, well, if I just tell you what my questions are, and it may be that I get answers and maybe I don't, but I did want, when the mayor had just said that they'd taken the easy political option and hadn't taken finances into consideration, that worried me, because I don't know what the working group's up to. So I just wondered if they wanted to respond to that. And then also whether we could have an update, because it's about what the situation is with Jubilee Pool. From, as a member of the community, we don't seem to be that involved. I know that the Jubilee Pool Action Group is, but there's an awful lot of other people, and it all seems to be still a bit hush hush. We haven't had any proper public engagement yet.
Right, I will make sure you get an answer either from the mayor or from somebody who is in a position to answer your questions.
Possibly the chair of the working group, which is Councillor Joss Clark.
It's Joss Clark. Okay, I will make sure that one of those two people answers your questions and make sure those are copied to me. I will then make sure that the Commission has the opportunity to view those answers if they want to. Does that satisfy you? I'm sorry, this is a slightly unusual situation, but are you happy with that?
Yeah, and thank you very much for your time, everybody. It's difficult to know where to ask some of these questions and get clear answers. So
I think we all realise that, Suzanne. Thank you. Right. Okay. Well, thank you very much for your questions, and that will go on my personal action tracker, so to make sure you get an answer. Thank you very much.
Right.
Now,
thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. I'm now going to move straight on to item 8, because there are no other public forum questions that relate to anything other than item 8 and item 9. Now, I've already asked this question of the people in the waiting room, and everyone seems to be happy to leave their questions until their item comes up, which is the normal way of doing things. So that's the way we're going to run it. So we're going to go straight now over to item 8, which is decarbonisation. Can I ask the officers here, or the lead officer here, to introduce your team and then give us a very short, you know the rules, a very short breakdown, after which I'd like us to go into questions from all councillors present. Thank you.
Thanks. Whether I'm lead or not, I'll kick it off on this, Stephen, unless you're...
Well, I can do just a very quick intro.
Thank you.
Because
Stephen, I didn't see you. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Negus. Yes, I won't say much. I just want to introduce Alex Minchell, who leads our sustainability team, and Gillian Durden, who leads on the actions we're taking within our own social housing. So it's best, I think, for them to take you through this very briefly and then open it to questions. And I can see Hannah waving at me as well. Apology, Hannah. Hannah Spungen from our energy services team. So we have 3 parts of the council working together to try and answer all of your questions. Let's see how we do.
Welcome all. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. So, yeah, the paper you've got before you tries to set out the kind of current situation around the work we're doing on decarbonising heat in the city. And that sort of jargon really means about how do we help to achieve the kind of the city's goals of becoming zero carbon, when our main heating source is gas, and that's in most buildings, and of course that then leads to the emission of greenhouse gas emissions, and so how we decarbonise our homes is crucial to achieving our strategic goals on climate change, and it's probably one of the most challenging areas to work in. What the paper sets out is a bit of an introductory section which provides some of the links back to the strategy and the climate change strategy, and then some of the major opportunities that are taking place that cut across all sectors, such as the City Leap Energy Partnership, which is in procurement at the moment, and then really just tries to open up the discussion for the two key parts of the estate. And Gillian's going to talk about the social housing sector, and Hannah about the work we do with the private housing sector. So that's all from me, Chair.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. I'm Gillian Durden. I'm Head of Plan Maintenance and work in Homes and Landlord Services, and I'm responsible for the asset strategy and delivery of all our investment programmes across the council housing estate. So this target is hugely ambitious for us, for our council homes, but has got us really thinking and working hard on different initiatives that we can bring to this to get us into the best place to deliver the carbon zero target. What we have done a lot of investment in energy efficiency measures across our homes over the years, and you'll see that in the report. And it's quite pleasing to see that our average SAP rating or our EPC ratings stand up quite well against other social landlords in the country. So I saw there was an article in Inside Housing just at the weekend saying that 50% of local authorities' housing is EPC A to C, whereas we're at 70%. So we've done a lot, but our existing programmes of work will not get us to the carbon zero by 2030. We need to think differently, and we need to try new initiatives. So we've got some pilots that are coming up in the next year. One of which is with Energy Sprong. We've applied for some funding from the carbon retrofit demonstrator project, and we've also got some WECA funding in place to support that, and we're going to do another pilot to go alongside that, and we want that learning to come into our teams, share across with the private sector teams with Hannah and across the whole WECA region, because they'll be interested in how this works out for our homes. We've got some studies going on as well. We've got work going on with our advisory service. We've got a tenant energy advisory service which help our tenants currently get better deals and apply for warm home funds, and that's outlined in the report as well, and that gives quite a lot of benefit to our tenants. And then our existing programmes of work will continue to increase energy efficiency in our homes with cavity wall and loft insulation enhancements, and dealing with heating improvements and things like replacing night storage heaters with more efficient heating systems. So all in all, we've got the project work going on. We're working with the energy team, and we're working with other providers and other councils, and we're tapping into funding sources to get ourselves into a position where we've got a plan and a strategy ready for when City Leap come on board, and we're ready for when any other funding is available. So that's me. Hannah.
Hello everybody, my name is Hannah Spongin. I am a programme manager in the energy service, and part of my remit is to look at the delivery side of domestic private properties in the city. So I say delivery in that Alex's strategy, and we try and make it happen. So it's quite a difficult task, because you can imagine getting domestic private homeowners to take up energy efficiency measures, and most of our work is where the funding is. So historically, and even now, it's amongst sort of fuel poor, low efficiency homes. It's outlined in the report that Bristol's done quite well. We've reduced our carbon emissions and gas consumption in the city by 23%, which is above the national average. And since 2014, we've had a dedicated energy service working on this, which is, you know, much better than a lot of other councils that don't have the resource there. And we've retrofitted in excess of 1,300 homes. We have a long-standing programme of works with energy company obligation, eco-funding, which is from the big energy companies to improve the efficiency of fuel-poor homes. And more recently, I'm sure that you've all heard of the Green Homes Grant Voucher Scheme. That's a government-run scheme, so that's not the local authority. And that scheme has come into some problems around supply chain, people to deliver. That's the challenge that we're facing at the moment. And WECA has commissioned a research piece to try and look into how to sort of stimulate that supply chain in the region. There's also the Green Homes Grant Local Authority Delivery Scheme, affectionately known as LADS. They've just came up with a phase 1B. So last Friday, we put in our bid for the Green Homes Grant Local Authority Delivery. That's around, we're here in January, so we haven't got the funding yet, but it's about 2.6 million to retrofit homes in the city. And we're looking at doing around 200 homes in Bristol, and we've done a consortium bid with North Somerset. So fingers crossed we'll be hearing about that in January. And that's taking a similar approach to Gillian in that we're doing some straight measures because it's easier to install one measure and two measure approach in homes, but we're also looking at more of a fabric first retrofit approach on a small pilot of homes so that we can really nail our process. And when we come to retrofitting, we do it properly and we do it fabric first. And then just to finish off, we also commissioned a support service for those in fuel poverty called the Warmer Homes Advice and Money Service. It's supported by various different funds, but the energy service brought some money to that last year. And also we've developed a fuel poverty action plan recently to work alongside our decarbonisation strategy and ensure that, you know, it's a just transition and people aren't left worse off as we move towards carbon neutrality.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'd like to move to questions now. Thank you all for your presentations. Can I open the floor up? And for some of you who don't know, you may need to wave to me a bit because my vision is not very good. Right, I see Joe first. I then see Martin. Who have I missed? And Carla at the moment.
Can I suggest that we maybe use the electronic blue hands that then Bronwyn can...
well, if Bronwyn can manage that, that's fine, but I find that very difficult with everything else going on. So at the moment, I've got Joe, Martin and Carla.
And I think Graham had your hand up as well.
Yep, thank you.
Just wanted to ask about the relationship between the tenants of our properties and the leaseholders, and how what sort of measures you have to take if you are sort of trying to sort of refurbish, refit, or, you know, with the homes that are, you know, occupied by tenants versus those occupied either by tenants of private landlords or owner occupied. And I know with flats they would be leasehold, but I'm not quite sure how it works with adjoining properties that have been sold off under right to buy.
Yeah, so that's a good point, Joe. In our blocks of flats with leaseholders, we could include them by consulting with them. If it, particularly if it's the fabric, then we need to involve them and include them in the whole project, and in which case they'd be consulted on the recharge for that work. If it's something inside the flat, like night storage heaters, we could make that available to them and they would then have a choice. And when it comes to owner occupiers in a street of homes, for example, adjoining owner occupiers, that's more difficult, and that's where we'd need to be working with our contractors delivering the work as to whether they would then offer that to the owner occupiers and take that up. And it's certainly something that we would be exploring to do, but yeah, there's quite a lot of complications around doing that, but we'd certainly be looking at that.
Please do that, Gillian, because there's been problems in the past where work that's been done on adjoining properties has caused damage to the neighbours. And actually, the neighbour I spoke to would have been quite happy to have had the same work done if it could have been done at the same time, and there would have probably been less of a risk.
Right. Okay. There's something around the quality management in all of this, and there's a new PAS 35 standard around a retrofit coordinator, retrofit designers. So that in a way is a better sort of approach to managing the quality, including on the adjoining homes.
And presumably leaseholders are required to pay some of the costs, and they don't necessarily get to have a say in some of the work that's done to the exteriors in the same way as any freeholder can do. I take it that's the case with the council.
With a leaseholder, if it's a block of flats and we were doing work to, say, windows, cladding, that kind of thing, then that work, you can't dip in and out of that as a leaseholder. You would get that work done and be recharged for it depending on the terms of your lease. Some leases are different from others. It's quite complicated depending on when you took it out. But if most leases, if it's an improvement, they don't have to pay for it. So it depends what counts as an improvement versus replacement of existing fittings and features. Yeah.
Thanks, Gillian.
Thank you. Martin.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks very much for the report. It's like really helpful to have it updated across all the issues that are going on, you know, public, private housing and so on. I've got a number of questions. So firstly, well, I'll tell you what they are. They're going to be one on heat pumps, one on energy sprung, one on fuel efficiency versus energy efficiency, one on the obstacles for leaseholders, the green homes, and then conservation area status, which affects private housing mainly.
Martin, if I may say so, you've covered a wide range there. Can we just have half of those now to give other people a chance maybe of asking similar questions?
I'll go halfway down, no problem. I just wanted to flag them all. So heat pumps, I'm delighted there's some evaluation of them. I mean, they're really designed for low energy properties anyway, rather than changing the way you heat.
Yeah, we're very interested in how heat pumps are working. We've got some heat pumps, and it depends. If you put in heat pumps to replace night storage heating, tenants are really happy. It's costing them a lot less, easier to run, easier to manage. If you've come from a home that used to be gas, you're not so happy. We're not putting heat pumps in to replace gas. We know that we need to do a lot more if we're going to do that. We either have to combine it with much greater energy efficiency works to the property in combination to make sure that the fuel costs go down, or combine it with a PV system, or the energy sprung approach is the whole thing. So yeah, we're very aware of that, and it's a key tenet of our strategy that the fuel poverty is a driver and not just achieving carbon zero at the expense of tenants' bills.
Yes, well, that's a really important distinction. Yeah,
absolutely.
But the problem is people are also talking about heat pumps replacing gas, which, as you've said, is more problematic.
Yeah, it can't be done just as a direct replacement. People won't want us in their homes to do it.
But I think just for the avoidance, just for clarification, heat pumps can be an appropriate solution if the insulation is put in place. Yeah. And so I think that's what Gillian is saying is if you're swapping out a boiler in an inefficient house for a heat pump, it's probably not a very wise thing to do. But if you're insulating the house and installing the heat pump, then that's a perfectly acceptable and sensible approach to follow, and why you will see that being advocated even by the heat pump installers.
Yeah.
But I'm conscious of time, and you've got some more questions, Martin.
Yeah, the trick is that's then a sort of double capital hit when what you're really trying to deal with is keeping warm. You know, and somehow the financing of that was what the Green Homes package was meant to do years ago, the Green Deal, but it never really worked in terms of that. Energy sprung is exciting, partly because when I've heard it explained over the last few years, it's about whole blocks, whole streets. are we going to be able to do like a whole street approach then in the pilot? Because that would be really interesting. It's only when it scales up it seems to be more likely to be viable. And you said cost neutral in the report.
Yes. So we are choosing our homes right now. We will choose pairs of semis and have a cluster of properties. It may be that forms a whole street. We don't know. We're still trying to select the homes. The cost neutral element is the whole energy sprung approach is to develop a supply chain that designs the product and is able to produce it, start to mass produce it. So it depends upon scale. So the pilots and the initial products are more expensive and are not cost neutral. Hence, we've applied for some grant funding from the government to help us with the pilots. But the concept is to develop the market, develop the supply chain, and then the cost come down through mass production. Also, the concept is around bringing forward existing programs of work that we would be spending money on anyway, replacing windows, for example, and roofs. And also looking at some kind of repayment type comfort charge for tenants who've got a reduced fuel bill, so that there's a win-win solution there. That's something that's new and different, and for us to sort of perhaps test in the pilot at a low level.
So are we allowed to charge slightly more rent because they're going to be warmer with less cost? Because that became a problem, didn't it?
It can't be rent. It would just be a separate charge.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there has to be a model to work for that.
Yeah.
Martin, forgive me, I'm going to move on, come back to you later. Carla.
Yes, thank you. Great report, very exciting. I've got a couple of quite quick questions, I think. In section 4.2.3 about the LAD scheme, I think there's a typo, but I just want to check it's true to make sure I've understood correctly. It says that the scheme, in the first paragraph, it says that it's for low income buildings with a combined income of 30k per annum. I assume that's meant to say below 30k per annum?
Yes, below 30k per annum.
Yeah, cool. Fine. In that case, that makes sense. And my other question was section 3.2.4, talking about the Tenants Energy Advice Service heat pump research study. You've said that a lot of, some people have reported issues with the heat pump systems they already have, but haven't gone into details of what those are. It would be interesting if we could hear briefly what the issues they're reporting are, and also what the solutions have been found to be.
Yeah, okay, so I haven't got all the details, Carla, but I do know, I did hear from the tenants of that particular block, and the reasons why we commissioned the study in the first place was it was just issues around the timing and the use of the system and having it come on at the right time and being able to operate it, and an issue around the perception of costs, or the costs of running the system. So some of that study led to us servicing the heat pumps and adjusting them and making them work better for tenants, and we've learned from that ourselves, as well as the cost of running it generally, even after the improvements. So I hope that helps answer your question. I don't have all the details.
Is that all right, Carla? I can move on?
Yeah, that's fine. I didn't need it, like excruciating detail, but just a gist. That's really good to hear that you're like going to the uncomfortable places, if you like, of like asking where you know that it's not going to be popular in order to get better, because it would have been very easy to go to the places where it's working well. So appreciate that you haven't done that.
Good.
Thank you.
Graham. Graham, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Good evening. First of all, I'd like to invite the team to come to Stockwood Ward to consider using to retrofit some of the properties in Stockwood. We have loads of green space and available for heat pumps. But I do think what's really important is that we're able to quantify the benefits of retrofitting, because most of the tenants that I'm dealing with at the moment have what they would consider, I think, to be greater needs. damp, mold, root damage to their properties, wanting more bedrooms. And I think if you were to ask tenants, actually, they would probably say that's their greater priority. And one other comment, really, I would rather see that we do fewer properties properly than go for quantity over quality at this early stage.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think they're really good points, and this isn't at the expense of our investment programme, which is looking at the other issues around damp and mould, but they go together with things like insulation and heating. So our electric heating will be looking at ventilation as well, and heating the hot water as well. The PAS 35 that I mentioned is a new quality standard, which is about addressing those kinds of issues. And yeah, we want to get it right, not just aim for the target.
And also, just to make it clear, I think that all of the initiatives that we're doing here are designed to demonstrate what is possible, how we can retrofit. It doesn't answer the question how we can pay for it. Yeah. So the strategy here, which is multifaceted, and hopefully tonight you're getting a flavour of it, is to say we need to have lots of examples of where things can be either affordable, to Hannah's point and the energy strong stuff, or maybe affordable with external funding. And with something like City Leap, getting a partner ready to enable us to move immediately. So when we are able to see a mass scale fundable program to decarbonise everything, let's say start with social housing stock, then we would be in a position to say we've got the examples, so we know what initiatives and what's measures, and we also have a means of getting it done. So all this is about preparing the ground, as well as obviously addressing issues of fuel poverty for those who we can help.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Graham, was that your question? Is that your only question at the moment?
No, that's all I really wanted to, just get my view of what I'm experiencing from council tenants at the moment, make sure their voice is heard.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll come in next, if that's all right. But please remember that questions are also open to Growth and Regen members and all other members. So I'll perhaps ask a couple of questions now. And they relate almost exactly to what Stephen has just talked about. Funding of this longer term is absolutely horrendous. And the problem we've got also is, it's an obvious thing to say, is that we've got an initial capital outlay and a longer term saving. The Green Deal did in the past try to resolve those, didn't make it. But what are you seeing as the long term shape of this funding process? Because it's going to involve some sort of forward financing, mortgaging, whatever you want to call it, and probably not through Bristol City Council, I suspect. So how's that going to work?
Well, we're aware of that. It's a lot of investment up front, and then the savings are from tenants' fuel bills, so it doesn't come back into the same pot. So it's a really good point. And our funding gap, we are estimating at between 250 and 500 million pounds, depending on what measures you think are necessary. And we haven't quite got the handle of all of that. So that's the point of doing the pilot work. Particularly the energy sprong is quite exciting because of the claim that it could be cost neutral. And then there's also the possible opportunities that City Leap could bring in terms of funding, plus being in a position where we're ready to apply for any funding that comes from the government, and they are announcing things, it seems on a monthly basis, but there is funding coming up all the time. There's the Green Homes grants, and there's the BEES funding coming through.
But there's still, I'm sure you'll admit, a huge gap. And whether it's cost neutral, and of course it must be cost neutral ultimately, there's still going to be this timescale problem whereby it all catches up with the initial capital outlay. And on top of that, and I did give Alex Minchell notice of this question, I'd be very interested in knowing the proportion of costs that comes on retrofitting, in other words, providing that wherewithal to make sure the house has reduced energy needs, with the extra cost of the provided energy. And there must be a ratio there between how much you're saving by having less heat to provide, how much you're losing by having to spend more for the heat that you're having to put in. So, Alex, could you answer that one, please?
Do you want me to?
Well, I suppose if you're, that's quite a complicated question.
Well,
I suppose if we,
you notice, Alex,
it is, you did, but the problem is the answer is it depends. Broadly speaking, if you're talking about the heat pumps and you're talking about gas boilers, then you're getting a 3 to 4 times energy efficiency on the amount of energy that's going into the system through a heat pump, and you're paying 3 to 4 times as much for the fuel as in that situation. So that sort of balances out. But that's why the context is you need to bring the energy demand down substantially, so that you can tolerate that, because obviously as that ratio changes, it becomes unattractive. But I just wondered if it's worth just going back to your previous question about where does the money come from. And I think what we're seeing at the moment is an attempt by government through the Green Home grants, is to catalyze the market and to stimulate the market on the help that as that then brings a bit more scale and improves the size of the market, costs and efficiencies will improve, costs will come down, and that will allow other people to access the things that would perhaps not be affordable to them beforehand. We've seen innovations in delivery like the Energy Sprong, where they've been able to effectively commoditize, make it like a factory-based approach to improving home energy efficiency. And by doing that, they've been able to really reduce the cost by doing it in the hundreds of thousands rather than the small numbers. So I think you've got potential kind of government funding to catalyze it. You've got efficiencies of delivery. And then you've got private sector finances from investors who want to make small but long-term and steady returns, the kind of pension fund type model. And so with those different kinds of interventions, what we'll hopefully get is bring the cost down and increase the amount of capital that's available to meet those costs, and therefore come up with those solutions. But I think, Stephen, did you want to say that?
Yeah, I mean, only to make the point that there does need to be a comprehensive retrofit policy package to make all of that work. And, partly it's a reflection of the huge need to improve economies of scale, to Alex's point, to bring these technologies and these solutions down the cost curve. Use the example of offshore wind 15 years ago and what a megawatt was costing then compared to now. It's scale that delivers those. So somebody's got to, and it has to ultimately be national government, underwrite the scale of implementation. Think of the size of a factory that you'd need to produce an output in terms of a ready-made retrofit skin for your kitchen or bathroom. If you have a massive factory, it's going to be a lot cheaper. So you need volume, you need supply. There's also the issue about the return will always be a long-term return. We're talking about utility at best, aren't we? For which you need 10 or 15 or possibly more years of payback. And so if you're talking about the owner-occupier side, how do you capture the value of that in the resale of a house? Yeah. Today you don't. So as I say, it absolutely needs a long-term retrofit policy package. What we're doing is we're exploring all the nooks and crannies in the real world, and we're producing good examples, and hopefully when those policy packages come available at scale, we'll be first movers on it.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I'm going to move on, but I'll just pick up on the last point you made.
Sorry, Anthony, just noting that we've got raised hands from Paula and Martin.
Okay, I'll come back to you in a moment, Paula and Martin. The public sector, the one that you're doing, the social housing one, is fairly straightforward. You are the owner. You organise it. You run the finances. And the payback comes back to you. To a certain extent, slightly differently, it comes back to the owner occupier too. What you put in, you get out ultimately, and there's a passport or whatever to move that on. The big problem in this city, particularly in this city, is the private rented sector, where there is a complete mismatch between the people that are required to put the money in and the people that get the benefit out. And there's actually no joined up circle there. That's one that worries me a lot. And there's nothing apart from two minor references to the £3,500. There's very little in this document about that. And that's something we've got to confront. I'll go on to, sorry, was it Paula or is Paula here? Paula,
yes, I just wanted to, if I could ask a question, please. It's about, I've been reading the report on decarbonising Bristol by 2030, which was done by the Centre of Sustainable Energy and Eunomia, I think. And they put a lot of emphasis on solar PV and essentially have said that, you know, at the moment, I think there's 1 in 48 homes in Bristol have PV, and that in order to reach our target, we need to get that to be 1 in 2. And I just wanted to know if somebody could give me some updates on whether that's been addressed, approached, whether it's right, is it going to happen, is it a good idea, how do we do it?
Sorry.
Hannah, should I pick up? So the study you referred to was looking at what would technically be required to decarbonise it. To the city, and so it's not about heat. Obviously, solar PV is not about reducing heat or carbon emissions from heat, because it happens in the summer, broadly speaking, and you need the heat in the winter, broadly speaking. So the solar PV we're looking at the potential, the sort of theoretical capacity of the city to generate energy, and how much of our energy demand, electricity demand, could we meet from solar PV. And so they looked at sort of maximising that opportunity. What's the potential resource potential of the city? And I think that was the sort of net purpose of that study. I mean, what it does conclude is that we still need to have massive supplies of renewable energy from elsewhere, even if we're able to reduce demand very substantially, because of the nature of a city having to draw in that resource. Hannah, did you want to say anything about anything projects that are happening to promote PV?
Well, I was going to say certainly PV is something that we are looking at under the Green Homes Grant local authority delivery. It's an eligible technology, so we're looking at installing PV under that grant, because often when it comes to retrofitting, although it's not improving the efficiency of the building, which is necessary, retrofitting PV is quite straightforward and obviously creates localized energy production. So the solution is really about all technologies, not one, but PV is often a very straightforward and simple thing to put in. So we're definitely looking at it, and we will be ongoing also.
Paula, are you happy with that?
Yes, so I see that it's sort of just not relevant to this report in the focus of this. Is that what you're saying? Okay, got that.
Yeah.
And I suppose in a way I was thinking rather naively, you know, that when you're getting your house done, you might as well get everything done at once. But I suppose they are very discrete things.
Martin.
Well, so I think the answer is yes, they are discrete. But clearly, if you're going to have works done and you've got scaffolding up, then things like putting the solar panels on at the same time, if you can do it, is a very sensible thing to do. Yeah, and the energy sprung approach that Gillian mentioned is taking that kind of very much that whole house approach to it.
Yeah,
Martin.
Yes, actually, I was going to look at a different aspect of that, which is the value of this whole house approach, which is you do everything and you take account of the fabric and the heating system, and hopefully the crucial third element, which is the people living in it and understanding how to live in the house, what the controls do, because quite often the controls are badly used, whatever the house, whatever the state of it. And that's sometimes one of the contributing factors to fuel poverty, is not even having controllable heating systems and old-fashioned storage heaters and things like that, which, you know, landlords don't explain how to use them and things. So there's that. And then the other side of it is doing enough to bring the worst houses up to a sort of minimum acceptable standard, which is a completely different sort of program in lots of ways, and can frustrate the sectors who say, well, you had the scaffolding up, but we didn't do that, and we didn't put the solar on, or we didn't change the heating system the same time we changed the fabric. And people then don't invite someone back after all that disruption. So we've got planners getting developers to put like 3 solar panels on a house when there's room for 10 or 12. Or
Martin, where's the question?
So well, we need to interact with not even creating future homes that are still not adequate for the overall goal of decarbonising, and then minimum standards to get people out of fuel poverty, which is a different programme.
Yeah, certainly a driver for us in our investment planning, Martin, is making sure that we've got the tenant in mind for all of this. So, and we know if a tenant can't operate it, then we end up calling out a lot more anyway. So we know that we need to get it right in terms of it being easy to use for a tenant. And the Energy Sprong pilot and the other pilot will be looking at that as part of the success factor for those. And the other thing I wanted to say was our strategy will be looking at worst first where we can, so that we're not leaving the worst properties behind whilst we're doing exciting things on other homes. So we've got 2 targets. We've got the zero carbon, but we've got the energy performance certificate C target. So we've got about 7,000 properties below that in the D category, and then just about 300 in the E category.
Yeah, that's really helpful.
And then just to quickly talk, most of the work that I'm focused on is for that people who are in fuel poverty, and the whole Green Homes grant is centered around how you bring that property up to a C. So you either have to demonstrate that you're doing it or demonstrate how it can be done. And alongside that, as Gillian's mentioned a couple of times, there's the PAS 2035, which is about a whole house approach. So every home should have a retrofit plan in place that says this is how you should be improving your property. And I suppose where somebody is using their own funding, perhaps a private homeowner rather than social housing, they can then make informed decisions about what they want to invest in and the best way in which to do it. So you can avoid having that going back and paying twice for scaffolding, because it should be in that plan. That's the theory.
Yeah, well, that was one of the faults of the Green Deal, which is if you did one measure, you then disqualified yourself from doing a bigger project because you only counted the payback and the deal the first time, and then you had to start again from scratch the second time. But I have more confidence of our housing service, our landlord service, to do things in the right order and of the right quality than I have in the private sector, frankly, where so much gets covered up and then you wreck the fabric. But we're in it for the long term, whereas a lot of private housing, it's not in there for a long time. It's move on and forget.
Are there any other questions? I certainly have some. Does anybody else who hasn't asked a question particularly yet? Joe, I see, but anybody that hasn't asked a question yet first? No? Joe, okay, off you go.
Yeah, it was just about, sorry, Gillian, going back to what you said, you talked about some sort of charge that couldn't be included in the rent. And I'm just trying to find any information about that, because it just occurred to me, first of all, presumably that charge people how you would work out who would be expected to pay extra, because I mean, that presumably means you need to have access to people's bills to know how much money they're actually saving, but also what sort of legal instruments can you use? Because if it's not rent, would you have to get tenants to sign new contracts in order to get new tenancies, in order for them to say, I agree to pay this, and also I agree to make information available about my bills so that I know my council, my landlord knows how much money I've saved, but also the people that are possibly going to be out of pocket, what are you going to do about them? Because some of these, I know that there's a block in Shirehampton, and they've moaned to me about their bills because of a heat pump, and they say they pay more now than they used to. So I mean, I'm not unsure the ins and outs of it, but that was definitely something. So I just wondered how that would be managed.
So the block in Shirehampton is Stowe House, and that's where we did the study that I was talking about earlier, and things are a lot better there now. The charge, yes, it would be a charge that's not in the rent, and so it would be down to an agreement that we would formulate with the tenant, And when we do the pilot, we're going to test all this out, and we'll test it out at a very low level token amount charge, and we'll be consulting before we bring that in, and it'll be a way. So they've done this in Nottingham, they've got the charge in place. And we will want to work with tenants through the pilot anyway, looking at what their bills are before we do the pilot, and then during and after, so that we can see how it's working for people. So we would hope to get people on board with monitoring all of that with them. And the charge will just be a part of that, but it would be by agreement. And we'd work that through the whole legal side of that charge and collecting it. And if people didn't pay it, is something that we really do need to explore as part of this approach.
Thank you.
Okay, believe it or not, we've been just about 40 minutes on this, but if I can just try and wrap up and ask the forward-looking question, how is City Leap going to be the major player in closing some of these gaps for us? Are they going to be a forward funder? I mean, clearly they're going to be somebody who can operate in scale, and hopefully we're going to have a skills upgrade as a result of that sort of investment. But we are talking of 3 sectors here, not just the social housing sector, to cover the whole city. Can you tell me very briefly how City Leap is going to play its part in the whole city taking this forward?
So obviously, as you mentioned, this does fall into a number of different areas. So where we have our social housing stock, we, as you say, we have control over large volumes of buildings which lend themselves to a different approach. In that instance, City Leap, the partner, will be expected, encouraged, invited to bring capital, knowledge, technology, networks, and innovation to bear in ways that we can't. We test the limits of our ability with being the council we are, and the reason we have placed such a huge emphasis on all of those credentials of those 3 organisations that are shortlisted is because they will bring world-class access to those things. So that's clearly good news for those parts of the network that we can provide, as it were, a system solution. In the other areas, I'm really interested in what you had to say on the private rented sector. I'm sure my colleagues are better placed than me, but I think it would take a different solution. And there I would say that City Leap is bringing its entrepreneurship to the city. So what we expect people to do is to spot, frankly, a commercial opportunity which may or may not be today market ready, i.e. may not be financially going to deliver a return that a private investor would regard as interesting enough to command capital. But using their entrepreneurship, we would be able to spot opportunities, again, in a way that we as officers would find harder to do. And in turn, we want to use that kind of opportunistic opportunity spotting to tell government how we can fix the problem. So it's truly about the partnership there that third party brings to the city to help us make better and better case studies for government. It's not the whole story by any means, because as we've all said today, there's a massive issue of patient capital and gap funding. But what we feel City Leap brings us, bearing in mind it's a pre-procured solution as well. So there is no need for us to go through an elongated process of testing the market. We have a pre-procured answer. So it brings a lot of advantages into this space, but it's not the silver bullet by any stretch.
Well, thank you very much for that. This has been a fascinating discussion. I wish it had been 2 or 3 hours longer, but thank you all for contributing to it. It is, as has been said, a very strong paper. It does beg a few questions, some of which have been raised today, and maybe some will be raised in the future. But thank you once again, and we'll let you go now, and we'll move on up the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, what now happens is that we're going to start bringing in the questions and statements which relate to the next topic on the agenda, which is the HMO licensing, planning and licensing issue. So all of the GNR people are perfectly at liberty to scoot off. This isn't part of their topic, but if you want to stay, you're very welcome. So I've got, right, no, I haven't. Yes, I have. I've got question. Can we start with questions, Bronwyn? I think you're going to have to more or less organise this. So we'll start with between questions 2 and 7 from Councillor Stevens.
Yes, Councillor Stevens, I think I saw you there.
You did indeed. Hello, I should be very quick because I know you're pressed. I have one supplementary. I think this officer's work is utterly brilliant. It's fantastic. The conclusion is this really has affected the housing market. There's one answer that says it's 2,800 homes built in the last 10 years that could be HMOs, that could become HMOs. Only 52 commercial buildings have been converted. So that leads us to less than 3,000 that's been increased. And yet the HMOs have increased 4,000. So that means it must have taken 1,000 out of the housing market. And we haven't had effectively any gain in 3 or 4 bed homes at all for 10 years worth of building. And the population's gone up and hopefully families have gone up, but there's no space for them because they're being turned into HMOs. So hopefully the SPD will improve that. My question is, I would like to finish some assumptions with whoever the officer was that gave these answers, which are utterly brilliant. Who is that officer, please?
Well, if I can answer Councillor Stevens, I provided the answer to question 3, and Gary provided the rest of the answers to your question.
Okay. Let me. I'll come back to you offline because I'm still digesting all the answers. They're brilliant. Thank you, Tom, and pass my. Oh, and Gary. Thank you, Gary. So I'll email you. All right. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I should just say that in all my many years of being a councillor, I have never had so many questions and statements in front of me in a commission, and I can't say I've ever had such long and comprehensive answers. So it's obviously a very popular topic, and thank you very much for all the officers for doing what they did. So I'll come on now to the next person I think is in the room, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bronwyn, which is Andrew Waller. Questions 16 and 17. Andrew, do you want to ask a supplementary? Are you there?
Andrew's just joined us from the waiting room, so I'm just checking that he can hear us.
Okay. Technology.
He may not be able to
Hold on. Sorry, I am here. Can you hear me?
Oh,
right. Thank you.
Let me put my video on. Right, there we go.
Okay. Tell Clive Stevens to turn his mic off.
Not Clive, it's that Andrew has the YouTube playing in the background at the same time.
That's right, I'm turning it off.
I'm sorry, I thought it was Clive. It sounded like Clive's voice. Okay, Andrew, I don't know if you heard that. Do you want to ask any supplementaries to your questions?
No, I'm here to present my statement later.
Indeed you are. Well, we've got, well, why don't you do that now, since you're sort of online? You've got one of the statements which is coming up. So you do that next and we'll go slightly out of order.
Right, you want me to go now?
Yes, please.
All right, thank you, Chair. So now that we have the HMO SPD in place, I suggest the council needs to think about next steps in how it deals with the problems caused by over-concentration of HMOs. These problems include, among other things, noise disturbance and poor waste management. The SPD helps stop over-concentration getting worse, but it doesn't directly address these problems where they already exist. Some other action is needed, and I hope your discussion points us in the right direction. As the report notes, neither HMO licensing nor planning regulation can bring immediate change. It says the most appropriate vehicle to deliver a, quote, immediate response to the kinds of problems mentioned is the council's neighbourhood enforcement team. If so, I think Scrutiny needs to take a detailed look at how NET operates. And disappointingly, I don't see that analysis in this report. For example, is NET prioritising the right things in the right places? The report talks a lot about waste management, whereas I believe the largest complaints category is noise. My area has many HMOs, most housing university students. Data from University of Bristol shows that noise accounts for more than 80% of the complaints it receives. Another example, you can't make a noise complaint to NET unless you provide a 14-day noise diary. But many noise events don't lend themselves to that approach. So people either don't complain or they fall at the first hurdle. Do NET records capture the noise problem that residents in Redland, Cotton and Clifton experience? If not, it's a major systems failure. Indeed, is the council's statutory duty to investigate noise being met? In conclusion, I hope the committee will ensure that we're getting the best possible response in areas already burdened with too many HMOs. I also hope this will be a collaborative effort. The SPD exercise revealed plenty of willing citizens ready to devote time and energy to solving problems. The SPD came out better and stronger as a result. As an example of council community cooperation, it could serve as a model going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. That was very helpful. Clive, if you're still within earshot, you've got your statement S3 here.
Hi, thank you, everyone. So actually following on from Andrew's, really the same topic. A lot of our key departments have been going blind, especially planning. I've noticed that because they're not getting data from neighbourhood enforcement. There's been all these, I call them one-off noise events going on. You now have to phone the police to get them to turn up. And if you then want the data to be recorded, you look at the NET website the next day, and it says you've got to keep a noise diary. So what are the chances of picking up any data? I appreciate that they're not going to come out at 2 in the morning and sort things out, but the data collection is utterly critical for policy development and for other departments responding. So NET must start recording these, setting up an ability to record these one-off noise events. And I hope Scrutiny will agree with me on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Clive. That was a very brief and thank you for that. I should have said earlier that not only have we got so many questions and responses, we've actually got within all these papers an incredible set of very intelligent questions, very perceptive questions, and also extremely detailed answers, which I've not seen the like of for a very long time. So once again, thank you all for whoever contributed. You'll have noticed that I passed over a comfort break. Is there a general demand for a comfort break, or can we soldier on? Okay, I'm going to keep moving.
No, Anthony, sorry, you didn't give us much chance to.
I did look around and scan
Some of us have got weaker bladders than others, and so moving towards the whatever thumbs up button or unmute or whatever actually takes quite a long time. You have to bear with us.
So you
personally like to have a comfort break, whether it's now or in a little while. If that's the end of the public forum, then maybe we have one now for 5 minutes and come back for the start of the presentation.
All right, well, we'll do that then. If I could ask everyone to be as quick as possible, and we'll be back in 5 minutes. Thank you. Very good.
Sorry, Anthony, just to confirm the time we're returning, I'll share my screen so that everyone has it on screen, and then give a 1 minute or 30-second heads up when we get to that time.
Wow, a countdown.
If that helps, certainly.
Well, no, you don't need to, but just, yes, you're quite right, because the public may wonder what's going on if faces have disappeared from the screen. Indeed, no, I understand. Okay, well, just give me the heads up in whichever way you think appropriate, Bronwyn.
Sure, just to confirm the time, did we say 5 minutes? So
Well, that
return
will be 6:08, about 6:08 to 6:09. Yep. Gosh.
We will reconvene in 1 minute.
Thank you. Right, welcome back, everyone. I make it 18:09, and I'd like to ask the officers presenting this report to be very brief, please, and to introduce the team, if you would, or yourselves as you go along. Thank you.
My name's Tom Gilchrist. I'm the Private Housing and Accessible Homes Manager, and with me will be Gary.
Good evening. My name is Gary Collins. I'm the Head of Development Management covering planning applications for the City Council.
I'm going to do a very brief overview of the paper, and then obviously we will be open for questions afterwards. So the paper which you have seen is quite a long, complicated paper, but it does provide you with an overview of how we are working in the City Council to manage houses in multiple occupation in the private rented sector. It contains a lot of information on property licensing of houses in multiple occupation, housing enforcement, both on licensed and non-licensed HMOs, planning controls that Gary's colleagues do, along with linked issues associated with those raised in the public statements around waste and noise. The report acknowledges there has been a significant growth in the number of HMOs in the city since 2011, which has had an adverse impact both on private tenants, because of the quality of accommodation tends to be worse in HMOs, but also on local communities. Changes in tenures in parts of the city undoubtedly change local community cohesion and can cause other associated problems. As a result of those pressures, the City Council has introduced a number of measures to both improve licensing conditions and standards through property licensing, but also introduced a number of planning controls through Article 4 and the most recently published SPD. However, both pieces of legislation stand separately. They are not interdependent on one another, and that undoubtedly can cause frustrations within local communities who see the City Council not acting together to try and deal with sometimes a growing problem. However, the other thing that I should say at this point is that both pieces of legislation, planning and housing, do take time to have an impact. They don't happen overnight, and that again can cause some frustrations within local communities. But what I would say, and it was raised by Councillor Stevens, was that there is a growing population in the city. The population projections for the city are for a significant increase over coming years, and there will be a need to house residents in the city and accommodation in the city. But what I would say is both planning and housing are willing to work together in sharing data and planning applications and property licenses issued to try and improve standards and control the number of HMOs in the city. That's the introduction from us.
Anthony. That's from both of you, I think, at this stage, as I understand it. Right, I'll open the floor to questions from councillors then. Who wants to go first? Gosh, there's not a stampede. I'm astonished. Okay, well, I'll try and kick something off then and see where that takes us. I don't think there's much dispute, Tom, and I've known you for many, many years, that there isn't a will to try and get this right within the city. What it's very clear from your report and from our experience is that this will does not exist further up the line. Can I ask, in all of your lobbying about, and there's some examples of this, of all your lobbying about trying to get this rather more proportionate, have you engaged other core cities? Have you engaged the LGA? How seriously has this national problem been taken upstairs?
I have certainly raised it through the core city private housing group. There is undoubtedly a common problem across all of the core cities in relation to planning and housing. Unfortunately, I think the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government's view is that by combining or linking both planning and housing, there may be unintended consequences that fall out of that combining of the legislation. The resulting fact of the matter is that if you are unable to, if you link planning with property licenses, the likelihood is that large numbers of established multiple occupied buildings may or may not get a license, and as a result of that, may not get planning consent to operate. And the unintended consequences, unfortunately, would be that significant numbers of local residents across the core cities would find they have nowhere to live.
Okay, so why do you think it is then, and you know, I'm sure you will feel the same way, but why do you think it is that the disparity between housing licensing and planning is very, very much greater than between premises licensing and planning, where there is now, as Gary will know, a process whereby the planning and the licensing elements of premises are kept well in view at the same time, and why also in terms of enforcement and court action and other forms of fining is property misbehavior treated so much more tolerantly than the average person in the street. You know, a youngster that gets something wrong and gets done for it, and yet every sort of mitigation and possible way out is given to bad landlords.
Well, I'll leave Gary to answer the licensing and the planning issue, because obviously I can't comment on that.
Sure, sure.
In relation to enforcement action, the reality is within the housing function, we have to focus resources at the worst offenders. Landlords who do not submit property licenses by deadlines are obviously followed up, and our requirements are for them to make a valid application as quickly as they can. However, as you will probably know, we regularly take landlords to court. We have a number of enforcement opportunities that are available, that are outlined in the report, and we regularly get significant fines. We had an HMO in Avonmouth, C Mills, sorry, earlier this year that was fined £60,000. But the reality is, taking landlords to court, using the complex legislation that housing is, takes officers out from doing what property licensing is around, which is about improving standards. I can say we have, you know, the courts have been suspended from taking action or from us seeing cases in court since April, since COVID started. We have a case that we had laid in court in March, is now being delayed until April, May next year. There are lots of cases that are running through the system. Unfortunately, we've been unable to get them into court. But property licensing is about improving conditions for tenants. It's not just about the big stick approach, prosecuting landlords. The other thing I should say around property enforcement and housing enforcement is that where a property is unlicensed and operating as an unlicensed unit, the tenants within that home have their own recourse to take their landlords to task. And as part of my service, we now regularly encourage tenants to apply for rent repayments orders and support them to do so. And again, over the last 5 months, you know, £50,000 has been recovered by tenants through rent repayment orders because the landlord has not got a license. In addition to that, landlords without a license cannot evict their tenants. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword. We're focusing on the worst properties with the limited resources that we have, but we're also enabling and encouraging tenants to take their own action where that's appropriate. Gary, do you want to answer the other part?
Yeah, happy to. Thanks, Tom. Yeah, so whilst I'm neither an expert in either housing licenses or premises licenses, that's what I mean by that, you know, entertainment venues, sale of alcohol and so on, you know, I do see how the planning system interacts with both of those separate systems, and they are both very different, but I think there are good reasons why, because I mean, it's long established that, you know, if you're going to sell alcohol or, you know, run a restaurant and entertainment venue, that you will need a premises license. So you quite often see the two operating kind of side by side. As we all know, we can't determine at what stage they apply for both of them. If they're alongside each other at the same time, that's most helpful, but often that isn't the way. But across the whole city, you know, people operating those kind of premises understand that they need a license. Here, whilst obviously we've had the citywide mandatory HMO licensing, Tom's service area have introduced these new areas of additional licensing, and the effect that that seems to have had is by catching a lot of properties in one go, with the sudden requirement for them to require a license to operate a HMO. So rather than like a steady stream of licenses alongside the planning system, we've now got a wave of HMO licenses alongside the need for planning permission. So it's a realization, I think, for property owners that they now need licenses to operate these HMOs, and they are, I think, adapting to that. And then by virtue of them applying and then getting licenses, we now have a body of a sudden surge of information where we are aware of properties that are HMOs, whereas before that we didn't know that they existed. So I think it reflects the way that the relationship's different in both examples is a reflection really as to the different controls and how they've been brought in.
Okay, but the landlords knew they existed. Other questioners, please.
There's raised hands from Carla, Joe and Martin.
We'll go in that order. Thank you very much.
Are we only doing questions at this stage and then doing comments later, or can we do them all together?
We'll do it the normal way, Carlo, which is you ask a question, but I'm sure you'll probably want to stretch it as well.
Okay, well, we've done it various ways in the past, so I wasn't sure which way you wanted to do this time. The thing I want to pick up on is the point that Andrew Waller made in his his statement, which is that this sounds great, the SPD and whatnot, but as the report points out as well, it can't act immediately or retrospectively, and so there should be a focus on the neighbourhood enforcement team now. And as Andrew acknowledged, I think the neighbourhood enforcement team is definitely suffering from being under-resourced, I know that, but I do also share his view that there might be some inefficient processes or not prioritising the things that bring the most benefit. And so I wondered if either we could consider that ourselves as community scrutiny, or that's something that we could task someone with looking into.
I'm not sure who's going to answer that, but I guess it's probably going to have to be you, Gary, because you're closer to the enforcement side, I think, than Tom is.
Unfortunately, I can't answer on behalf of that service area. It's a different service area to planning, I'm afraid. So,
I know, I'm aware of it.
Yeah, so
Anthony, Chris Winscoe is here from the neighbourhood enforcement team, so he might be able to answer that.
I didn't see him.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, you are here. Oh, my apologies. In that case, away you go.
Okay. I mean, I understand. Yeah, some work could be done and looking at kind of how we do focus our resources. I would say currently we have 5.5 officers dealing with waste and highways issues, 3 dealing with nuisance, and then 3 dealing with licensing enforcement in relation to taxis and premises. So we do have a very small number. We do try to look at basically where kind of we can have the most impact. And I know there's some frustrations with local residents that has been raised here to do with the need for doing the diaries. And a lot of our focus is actually on what we can actually legally do. So we are aware there's a number of people that complain, for example, about noise. Of course, our legal duty is around statutory nuisance. So yes, whilst the resident may be disturbed by noise as a one-off incident, for the council to be taking action and serving the likes of an abatement notice, we will be looking at a statutory nuisance, which is an ongoing behaviour. So whilst not dispute, the local residents are being disturbed by can be one-off parties, there isn't actually kind of any action that can be taken. One of the things that was done in creating neighbourhood enforcement, there was quite a reduction, 40% reduction in officers. So there has to be them kind of prioritising on that work that was going. There was also a number of issues to do with the back office staff in relation to hundreds of kind of reports of those one-off events were just building up and up and up. And letters would be going out sometimes weeks later after an incident's gone on. So the previous system, when anyone could just call in at any time, wasn't working, which is why we've introduced the 14-day diary to actually help kind of do that assessment, so we can actually prioritise our limited resources, be that with night visits installing noise equipment or working with the university or different partners.
Does that answer your question, Colin?
No, not really. My question was to community scrutiny as to whether we could consider this in the future.
Well, we've got an agenda already for this year, and as you know, I wanted a particular group dealing with this, and that was not accepted. So I'm very keen to do this, but the rest of CSC wasn't. So I think the answer to that has got to be no, very sadly. Next question was from Joe, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, I mean, you just actually, Chris, you just said something about cuts in staffing. I just wanted to ask in general, have any of the teams seen increases in resources as a result of the extra work they're now taking on as a result of this change? But also I wanted to ask about constraints, because it seems, you get a lot of very frustrated people. I mean, we've had a lot of people submitting to public forum with questions and statements, and that it is something that people find very frustrating, that it feels like there's no real power to do anything. And I just wanted to know that obviously we've picked up on the sort of a sense of disconnect because of the way planning and licensing aren't allowed to blend that well together. But are there other constraints? I mean, do you think that with a bit more, could you do with a bit more power? I suppose that's just really what I want to know. Is that what's stopping things from happening, or I don't know? I mean, I just wanted to try and get a sense of what the constraints are.
If I go first, if that's okay, certainly in relation to property licensing and housing, certainly when a property licensing scheme is introduced, it is cost neutral to the local authority. So whatever we generate from property licensing fees, which landlords have to pay, has to be accounted for and paid for through the licensing enforcement, inspection and processing of the application. Unfortunately, that money is not able to be used for other associated general funded activities. It's quite clearly stipulated in the legislation. So from my team's perspective, the provision, the declaration of the additional licensing scheme in the central area of the city has enabled additional staff to be recruited to do the inspection and enforcement of those licensing requirements. But as I said, that is solely around the licensing, the defined licensing function. It cannot go beyond that.
One thing just to follow on from that, of course, one of the benefits of actually the HMO licensing is actually very easier to get hold of those landlords' details, or at least, sometimes it could be everything from, just a phone number. For example, during the first lockdown, we did have a number of premises alarms that were going off, and actually the property being licensed as a HMO means we could actually get hold of that landlord to actually kind of deactivate that nuisance. So there is that kind of the benefit, and I think there's kind of the longer term benefits that come from both planning and from HMO licensing. And our same work also, we do licensing enforcement to better kind of access those systems, to better get that other information of different parties involved and identify who they are, is a benefit to kind of be able to take quicker action.
Chris, you had an open goal there. You were asked if you wanted more powers and more resources. Isn't the answer a big, loud yes?
Of course, yeah. At the end of the day, if you've got more resources, the more that you can apply. So yes, of course, never going to turn down more resources. But one of the big things, we're also aware of is that we do need to also be looking at how we can be more joined up. So there are a number of areas when it comes to planning. Of course, we do have quite a few issues where we have the crossover to noise with HMOs, to do with where those areas are for actually doing targeted work and then linking that in. The big thing we're looking at the moment is looking at, the information that Bristol Waste has, along with where we have the HMO licenses, to actually identify, so we can be a bit more tasking orientated. Of course, it always takes time for more resource to come in, but in the meantime, we do want to be kind of more working to more of a tasking model, so we can identify some of those issues.
Just what you said, I mean, Anthony was very helpful with his interjection there. But I mean, I understand that everybody will always like to have more resources. I suppose I just wanted to know whether you had any, and not just NET, but the other teams as well. But I suppose really what I'm concerned about is this issue around whether you are sufficiently empowered. Because I think that's probably the thing that I find most concerning. I feel frustrated as a councillor that I can't always get solutions for people, because that, you know, people are quite often working with one hand tied behind their back, and it would be useful in a way. And obviously we have to be careful here, because, you know, you guys can't sort of be moaning in a way that us politicians can, but it would be useful to kind of have a list of what would be good to have, you know, being somewhat realistic in terms of what would help you. Like for example, when our residents are complaining about a problem with noise, and then they're finding that things aren't being, you know, dealt with the way they would like to be. If there's an issue there in the law that doesn't allow you to do certain things that might make it easier to resolve that issue. That's just the example, because people have said noise is the big one. And I suppose the other thing is things like, you know, the bins at the end of a student tenancy, for example. You know, quite often the front of the house will look a complete tip, and it may well be that the students have foregone their deposit and left it to the landlord to clear it up, which I suppose they are entitled to do if they paid a deposit. But how do we know that the landlord has kept the deposit but has chosen not to clear the mess up? And when does it become the student's responsibility, and when is it the landlord's responsibility? So we had that. I think I asked that question before, but I think it would be useful to have that understanding of what you can do where a landlord you know is you know, whereas officially the tenancy is still held by particular people, but they've gone and they're not coming back, and they've, you know, dealt with everything. Would be useful to know what sort of action you can take.
Okay, so I mean, a lot of the action, regardless of if it's to do with our licensing, our waste or noise work, is down to kind of the conduct of the individual. So be kind of the one who we kind of deem to, you know, having evidence is responsible. So whilst the students are at the property, any kind of waste that they're producing, we could be in the, say, I assume kind of like waste in the garden, we would be actually taking action against the actual tenants themselves. If the tenants have of course moved out of that, at that stage, it will become the kind of the responsibility of the landlord. Of course, we do get lots of complaints that during the student moving out times about kind of waste that's kind of deposited on the street. Now, of course, when it comes then to fly tipping, the actual offence there is about the individual who deposited that waste. So you do get a number of, you know, a number of kind of queries, especially around a householder duty of care. That's a big thing that was kind of came out last year in relation to an additional fixed penalty notice. But that's to do with how waste is transferred to someone, not whose responsibility of where it ends up. So a lot of kind of the waste offences that we deal with is about a specific person who deposited a specific waste, not over who we, you know, think, you know, should be responsible or not for that.
Yeah, but I suppose what I'm trying to get at is that if the landlord, if someone has left stuff in the garden, I mean, most houses have got some sort of front garden, so it might not even be on the street. It might not even be owned, you know, on land owned by the council. So and it isn't fly tipping in the public sense, but it's there, and perhaps there's health issues around it, and perhaps they've gone off at the end of June, and the landlord's gone off to their retreat in the Caribbean or wherever and left it for 2 months until the next tenants arrive, and in the meantime there's a rat problem in the street. You know, in that respect, I would argue that is down to the landlord to ensure that that is dealt with, and if they want to punish the tenant for it, then fine, by taking their deposit. But reality is you can't always rely on the people on the lease. Sometimes it has to be the owner.
Yes, and sometimes we would. So, yeah.
Can I possibly answer this? Because obviously I understand entirely where both Chris and where Joe is coming from. And you asked about whether we had an ask of the existing legislative framework in which we are operating. And I think my answer to that, and I think Chris will probably agree with this, is it needs to be simplified dramatically to enable us to be able to easily take action against somebody quickly. And at the moment, the legislative framework in which Chris operates, and to a certain extent, the legislative framework that applies to licensing, and I suspect to a certain extent within Gary's planning terms, is really complicated. It's really difficult to pin responsibility for certain overarching offences, and then having sufficient power to ensure that the polluter pays, the person that's causing the problem is taken to court and properly punished. And at the moment, that's really quite difficult to do, I think, across all of our work streams.
Okay, Martin, I think you were next.
Yeah, thank you.
And pointing out, John's got his hand up as well.
Thank you very much.
I'll try and be brief. I'm thinking my experience of planning is that there's a presumption in favour of development, and planning is there to enable it, provided all the right conditions are met. And quite often enforcement means giving the developer, the landlord, whatever, the chance to put it right and get the permission. I'm not entirely convinced that's exactly the way the landlord licensing works, which is about being a suitable and fit person.
Yep.
And you can take account of other things. So there's a slight possible tension there, and then the neighbourhood enforcement kind of falls in the middle as to clearing up the problems that might arise. But I'm wondering if, because of the different ways the two systems work, there are all these utterly frustrated residents who've got streets with HMOs in them, and they don't perhaps kind of realise the sort of legal and professional differences. But does it mean things are falling outside what can be done, or indeed that the different ways these two different services offer it is pushing the problem to other areas that we're now not managing? So we're not managing the areas outside the licensing area, are we, the HMO? So is it going to be pushing the problem elsewhere?
Possibly. I don't think there's a definite answer to that question. I think undoubtedly, as I mentioned right at the start in the introduction, HMO numbers are growing exponentially, we believe, because of housing pressures in the city. And that's not just happening in the city centre or around student accommodation. It is happening all over the city boundaries. And obviously the Article 4 directions that Gary and his colleagues have introduced is an attempt to try and constrain that. But undoubtedly, licensing by its very nature, as is taxi licensing, as is sex shop, is a bureaucratic process. It does provide resources and it does provide extra powers. It does enable, in relation to the private rented sector, somewhere for tenants and somewhere for other parts of the organisation to go to get details about property information. I think the challenge that we will have, and I suppose this is the next stage and where we would like to go further, is potentially to extend HMO licensing, property licensing, beyond the existing 12 wards or 14 wards of the city, if you include Eastville and St George West, which are subject to licensing. But obviously expansion of licensing and potentially expansion of the Article 4 areas will not resolve completely the pressures that there are. Undoubtedly, depending on what a resident is complaining about, will depend whether it goes to planning ourselves or to the net team to enforce. But I have a feeling, and again, I can talk from a property licensing perspective, anything that lands with us where we have an enforcement responsibility, we will always respond to. It might not be the answer that the resident is asking for, because we have to work within various legal constraints, but we will try to do that. We will try to always act on any justifiable complaint that they make to us.
Okay, thank you. Martin, I hope that was okay. John, your question.
Yeah, sorry. Thanks for the report. It's really good, really thorough. answered pretty much all my questions. My question was actually about the income from license applications, which you've already answered, about how that's used, and you've said that it's ring fenced, effectively it has to be used for this purpose. So I did have another question following on from that, but it's gone. If someone wants to go next.
Let me piggyback on that question and ask for a clear answer about fines that come out of this process. You mentioned a £60,000 fine, Tom, in Lawrence Weston, I think, or Avonmouth, Shirehampton. Can you tell me how much of that money came back to Bristol City Council?
None of it.
That's what I thought. So yeah, that's one of the problems that we have.
Sorry?
With some other fines, certainly with fixed penalty notices and various other things, we have the ability to pull that income back and fund more officers to go and get this work done properly. We don't as soon as it comes through the court system. And that's a major weakness in this whole process, I think.
Well, there was a new power that was introduced under the Housing and Planning Act 2016, which introduced something known as civil penalties, which apply to property licensing. And we have a civil penalty policy where we can go through sits within the same legal status as a prosecution, and any income from that is ring-fenced for housing enforcement activities. So it can only be used for housing enforcement.
Sure.
The challenge we've got with that process is that it must meet the same legal requirements that a prosecution would have to meet to go into court. So it's slightly different than a fixed penalty notice, like for somebody parked on a double yellow line. You can just slap these out willy-nilly. We have to go through a legal process before we use civil penalties, and we do.
Yeah, there's lots of mixed messages, though, in this report. You've given us quite a lot of detail about legal judgments, legal counsel's advice, and various other things. We've also got the overweening mayor's principal policy of clean streets, which is meant to transcend everything. And yet it's very clear that we do not have the powers to deliver any of this. I mean, this is Kirk James's answer all the time. There are no powers to do this. So I will ask you, Chris, and you won't be able to answer, but I'd like you to get back to me with an answer. Under 22.4 to 22.7, I'd like to know how many instances have you done what's recommended in that policy, and also in 2310, what has been done under EPA in that respect. And I suspect the answer will frighten all of us, because it's going to be very, very few. And those seem to be our only opportunities to do anything at all. So if we have policies and it's hardly a political thing. If we've got a policy in Bristol to do something, then what's happening is the national policy and our resource ability makes it impossible for us to deliver it. This is a nonsense. Please comment.
I'm happy to run reports and get those numbers to you.
Thank you. We are desperate, all of us. It doesn't matter what party hat we've got on. We are desperate to do this. And at every turn, we are being told that it can't be done. It's exasperating. There we are. Any other questions, please? I mean, this is a yes. I see you, Carla, again.
Just wanted to flag that there's lots of really good points in the public forum, and I'm sure that the officers were shown the questions in order to help formulate answers, but what I'm not sure is if you've seen the statements. And so I'd like to ask if Bronwyn could forward the full public forum to them all, if you haven't already, and to ask the officers to look at those in quite a lot of depth, because frankly, I could sit here and read out all of the points they've made, but it's probably not necessary. But I think there are loads of points in there, including some what seemed to me like very good suggestions for both the HMO and the planning side and the neighbourhood enforcement side, that it would be great if you could go away and look at those after the meeting.
Sure. Just to confirm, the statements have a later deadline, so would only have been pulled together today. I believe I have sent them out to officers. Chris, I believe I sent it to Nick rather than to you, so I'll send it on directly to you. But I can send it again just to make sure it's all been noted.
Thank you, Bronwyn. Carla, if I may say, a lot of the questions, a lot of the answers begged further questions. Certainly, I'm sure you're aware of that. And the statements, which I only managed to read minutes before we started, have also got some very, very good points, which I think need to be got. So, I mean, maybe Tom, could you and I together try and make sure we can get to the bottom of this and make sure it's circulated back to the people that asked and made the statements and to this committee?
Yes, that's not a problem. I can certainly liaise with Gary and Chris. And,
sure. Well, I'll use you as the front door, if I may. I think this would benefit everyone, and the three of you included. Some of very astute, perceptive points have come out of some of this, and it's really important that we nail these down. Before I wind up, I wish to goodness we had much longer on this because I've got loads more questions. Are there any more questions from anybody else here? No? Not? Oh,
Yeah.
sorry, Joe, off you go. I didn't. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, it was just a comment, really. I just wanted to say, I mean, echoing what Carla said, I mean, I think the point is you were quite surprised that we weren't all rushing forward with loads of questions after the presentation. And I think you've just answered the question. The fact is the public, the people who participated in the public forum have done our work for us. And I would echo what you've suggested, that it's quite important that this gets what they've asked and what they've suggested gets digested and as part of this process, because I think I would like to think I would have asked some of those questions. I'm not going to claim that I would have done, but the point is that those, we should fully exploit our public and their concerns and get that information processed and dealt with, and I would be very happy if we could follow up on this, perhaps at a later meeting, if we can spare some time.
Okay, well, in that case, let me come back to something Carla said earlier. Carla said that she felt this was important and we should be doing more on this. I actually put this right at the top of my list when all of the members of CSC had a list of things that we should be taking forward, if you saw that. And this one came out quite low on the list. I'm personally very happy to revisit that, because I think this is such a complicated subject that goes to the heart of so many things we do in the city. I think we need to get this right. And I think, despite what the officers have told us, there are powers that they desperately need and haven't got. And we do need to do things better. And that needs national intervention. So what I'll do, if I may, I'll put round a note again, asking again if people would want to be able to take this forward to a further meeting, if that fits with at least 2 or 3 of us in the meeting here, and we'll see where that leads us.
If it has to be a sort of us asking whoever's on the scrutiny next civic year to prioritise this high, then I'd be okay with that. Certainly, speaking for myself, it's actually this report plus the public forum statements are what have highlighted to me that now that we've got the SPD, hurrah, great work. Now it feels like enforcement is has become more important by the other issues around it being now solved or on their way to being solved. So that's why the priorities have shifted a bit for me in the last few months.
Yeah, okay, yes.
If I could just very quickly add, I think the point is it's almost like we're now working out where we're at, and there are limits. And I think that needs to be very clearly communicated outside, what does and doesn't get done by which service and why and where. And then we have to find what other bits do we have to try and deal with. And we can come back and do that next year, potentially, when we've actually worked out what the options might be.
But you see, Martin, much of this has not been because these 3 officers here are telling us very politely that they're doing everything they can within the powers that they have.
Yeah.
And it's not unlike a lot of scrutiny commissions, it's not a case of us saying, you're not doing your job properly, guys, you're not joining your dots up properly and all the rest.
No, they're all working within, they're all working within
right.
the
It's
fields and
somewhere
the
else.
rules and the powers they have. But
we
what we've got to do is work out what that's going to do, or whether we can change it. And changing it probably means some national change.
It does. I think the officers would accept that. But how to get from where we are now with a mayor that's actually said this is certainly clean streets and other things related to what we're talking about today are all very important to him. Clearly, the mayor is constrained as well, and frankly, we should help. That's Scrutiny's job. We should see the problem, illuminate it, and try and help it. And I see this as a major problem in the city. I know we've got to separate the student and the non-student HMOs, and I know they're all in planning terms and licensing terms treated the same way. But the fact is, and Clive may highlighted this, we're increasingly opening up places in this city that do not pay council tax. We are increasingly promoting more problems and inability for this city to deal with the problems that we're creating. This is madness. This is something out of Jonathan Swift. We just can't go on like this. Yes, Don.
Yeah, I mean, the neighbourhood enforcement team did mention a shortage of resources. I'm not keen that any discussion should end up in a refocusing of resources on student problems, because there is a need for enforcement in all the other areas of the city as well. Perhaps the councillors who are particularly affected by student problems may like to go as a delegation to the university and ask for some resources to support the enforcement in those particular areas.
Yep. Okay, point made. Graham.
Yeah, it's something, because HMO is an issue that I haven't really come across in Stockwood wards. However, I've probably got two quite serious cases arising now. So I think it is very important to recognise that it's not just a student issue. And it is something that, as Tom has made clear, it is going to get bigger and bigger, I think, as an issue for all parts of the city. So we need to have a clear reporting mechanism, a clear escalation mechanism, and a clear sort of strategy as to how we can deal with this using the existing powers, and then separately and ask as to what else we need to enable us to manage this properly.
Okay, I think that's a good point at which to end.
Sorry, Anthony, we do have a couple more hands up from Joe and John.
Okay, can we keep this very brief, because I need to wrap up? Thanks.
No, I didn't. I think I forgot to put it down last time, or I put it again.
Yeah. Same here.
Same from John.
Okay, that's fine. All right, I think we'll wrap up with that and thank the officers fulsomely, I think, for a terrific set of answers today, and particularly in the papers. I mean, I will keep all this stuff. It's going to be a Bible from now on. And as you've heard, we're looking to take this forward as well and see where that takes us. And maybe, and I hope so, it will help you three as well and your teams. So thank you very much again, all of you. And I appreciate your time. Thank you. Right. I should just record that we had a statement about verges, which was S3, but the person isn't here to speak to it. So that will take us straight on to our final substantive item, which is a conversation with Councillor Afsar Shah, who is, and I hope I get this right, the Cabinet Member for Climate, Ecology and Sustainable Growth. Have I got that right? Where are we? Yes, hello. Have I got that right, Afsar?
Absolutely, Chair. Yes, that is the full correct.
So be at ease. Okay. What we'd like to do is build as a conversation. I think what we might do is perhaps just start with some questions to you, and I think you might use at those questions as an opportunity to expand on certain areas of work that you think are important within your portfolio. Does that suit all right?
Absolutely, yes.
So who would like to start off? John, do I see your hand? Was your hand there? No? Who would like to start off? There's a hand raised? No? Right, well, I'll start off.
Well, there's a hand from Martin there.
Oh, there is. Good. Martin, off you go then.
Okay, well, I was probably putting up just when you were, but well, thank you for joining us for the conversation, Afzal. That's really helpful, very welcome. And we've previously, I mean, I've heard some really positive things recently about how helpful the managers of one of the parks and open spaces are with requests from residents to change the sort of mowing and sort of the management regime. But at the same time, we've also had it suggested that it's quite complicated to change the contracts and that there are cost implications, or it might be a slow process. So I'm wondering where you feel we're at in terms of reviewing how we respond to wildlife management and verge management, which are different in different areas, parks, highways, housing areas, and where the contracts are in terms of making it a sort of a different approach across the city potentially, or area by area, site by site, how you think that's going.
Yeah, so thank you for that question, Councillor Ford. Sorry, I was just tempted to put my camera on there, but I've got two toddlers, so I'm just keeping an eye on them as well. Yeah, so regarding the verges itself, so they're actually cut 3 to 12 times per year, and that really does depend on the arisings. So was there something specific which you wanted? Sorry, I just had to just get my wife to actually take my son away then. Sorry.
Okay. Well, I was, one point was that in some areas it's seen as that the contracts in place have kind of locked us into a particular approach, perhaps for a certain amount of time. I'm not sure if that's necessarily the case, but there are costs to changing the verge mowing regime, probably, aren't there? And yet we are getting requests for it. So I'm wondering where you think we're at in terms of dealing with that.
Yeah, so that's something which we can look at. It's just that different areas are cut a different number of times. I mean, yeah, so some areas are cut 3 times per year, some are cut 12 times per year. Really does depend on the topography, on how often the arisings are actually removed there. And I think, yeah, we can't look at this without considering the regimes that we've got, you know, and that's about cutting and collection. And yeah, we've also got to take into consideration the regularity, also how that affects the soil nutrients as well. And then there's something else called a 1 in 3 cut as well, if I remember correctly, where that verge would be cut once every 3 years. So, you know, whether that's over winter, yeah, really depends on the habitation. And there's something else which you'd probably be interested in learning about, and that's the meadow Bristol cut which they have, and that's a more intensive approach. They use a lot of different pollinator plants, which is much better for the environment itself. So I don't know, I mean, does that answer your questions? It's just that the specifics on the practicalities, that's something that I would actually put to Richard Enyon, as opposed to, you know, perhaps something, whether that is something for me to answer. But there is a big issue around communications as well. It's just that, you know, for far too long, we've had this, that we've had this, that we've become accustomed to seeing very neat, nicely sanitized cut verges, but you see, in some instances, some of our staff have actually been abused by members of the public, because what they're saying is, you don't really care. The council isn't interested in actually cutting this. That we're just trying to penny pinch. But I think it'd be good to get Richard to answer this.
Well, Richard, you had your hand up. Would you care to introduce yourself? I also noticed that Alex Minchell has come back into this part of the meeting as well. So the three of you, I think, will all be. It would also be great, Ursula, if we could actually see you.
Okay, let's see if I can get the camera on.
It would be good. Richard, off you go. Thank you.
Hi, good evening, everybody.
You're very faint, Richard.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
Faint. Well,
is that working?
Just about.
No, it should.
That's better. That's better. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Okay, I won't land a plane, but I'll try and speak a bit louder. Hi, yeah, it's Richard. So I'm in the Parks Department. I'm the Parks Development Manager. So, Councillor Fodor, you're asking about. I'm going to take this off because I don't think it's working. No better.
Much worse. You've gone from quiet to nothing at all, unfortunately.
Oh, I thought you'd.
Sorry, I heard a man.
Can I just ask? Everybody seems frozen. Everyone's camera seems frozen.
No, that's at your end, I'm afraid, Afzal. We're all moving to each other.
Okay, I'll try shouting and see if that works. Okay, it's just a bit unreliable. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So this is about grass verge management, and this is really about how do we move from a more traditional amenity type cut into something which is going to be much better for wildlife. So I think to do this, technically, it is not something that's overly unknown. We can do this, but there are clearly some considerations that we need to get right. You mentioned firstly about contracts. So most of the grass verge maintenance is undertaken through our in-house teams currently. So in that respect, we have greater flexibility. The one exception, though, is that we currently have an agricultural works contract which cuts our wildflower meadows. Now, I know you're talking about grass verges, but there is a relationship between the two because it's cutting grass. So that was something that's separate and we could look at in a different way. In terms of, so is there a question or am I? Okay, so in terms of how do we want to approach this, so we've already started a work program to look at how can we move from this more traditional amenity cut, which as Councillor Shah was describing, is typically the grass gets cut between 3 and 12 times a year, and the arisings are left in situ. And it's that grass cut which is left in situ which needs to change, because that keeps the soil quite fertile, and that suppresses those plants which are going to be good for pollinators. So the process of change, broadly, there will be detail, broadly, is that we need to recapitalize and have new machinery which is capable of cut and pick to remove the grass arisings. Now, if we do that with the right machinery, then over about 3 years of continuing to cut on a fairly regular basis and remove the grass arisings at each time, then after about 3 years, on average, the nutrients in the soil will have dropped sufficiently to enable the expression of more variety of plants. And that will be then moving towards more nature rich, away from this kind of actually fairly deficit, poor nature expression that you typically get in grass verges. So there is a cost to that, because clearly at the moment we don't remove the arisings, and we do so because it is cheaper. And if we are going to remove the arisings, we need to get the right machinery. So we're now looking at detail, what machinery do we need and what the rollout is, because we've got machinery which is currently working. I don't think we're going to press a button tomorrow and we're going to convert everything into this new regime. So we need to think about the right progression of this. And I think it's also important, as Councillor Shah was referencing, we need to take the people with us on this, because it is quite a change. Clearly, people are very used to their grass verges being cut on a regular basis. So if we're going to change that, we need to explain why. And we need to take people through this period between starting the new regime, and it's probably not looking a lot different, apart from maybe the grass might be a little bit longer, or maybe it's not expressing the nature that people want. It's going to take several years. So we need to get that message out. And I think we need to find the sites first where we've got the greatest chance of making that successful, and then working that through. Now, that detail is really looking at sites. It's getting the logistics right, the communication right, the machinery right. So we're looking at that now in detail with a plan to come back in terms of what that prioritization might be, what the communication should be, and that's broadly the communication rate of the ecological emergency in terms of how we're responding. So it's not just a one-off, there's a whole collection of thinking. And then what we need to do in terms of recapitalisation. So that detail's to come. This is an introduction to the subject. So we are doing the thinking, and we will come back with those points clarified. So that's broadly where we are. I'm very happy to have any detail that comes out of what I've just said. Otherwise, I can hand you back.
Martin, are you
clear? That's really helpful. Thank you.
Well, can I add to it?
But it tells a story and a timescale.
Before I bring Graham in, can I just add the word seasonality? And also, I don't know about anybody else, but I certainly don't cut my grass 12 times a year. In fact, I cut it as few times as I possibly can to make sure that I have as much natural life in the area as possible. So it seems to me that it would be reducing the amount that we do, which might actually have some benefit here, rather than actually changing it completely. And seasonality is important. But I'll bring Graham in.
Make sure I wasn't muted. So good evening, everyone. Yeah, so in Stockwood Ward, we've got some areas which have had a reduction in regularity of cutting over many years. And some like the Saltwell viaducts, we've seen where they used to cut for grass, they just don't cut at all. And as part of wildlife management strategy, we have to remember that grass is not just everything. We have to make sure that there's a nice mix of trees and grass and shrubs or bushes. And it's trying to get that balance right. But in terms of the specific point of verges and things like that, and residential areas, agreed what's most important is that we take people with us. We have to communicate very clearly from an early stage, because for some residents, they've seen that piece of grass outside their house cut for 60 years. And they will see it as a reduction in the quality of the service they're getting from the council. So we have to make sure that those benefits are explained fully before any such changes would be my view on it.
Okay, can I move the subject along a bit, because we want to talk about the whole of the ecological portfolio, and we've only got a few minutes. Carla, we got another topic, please.
Yeah, I've got a few different questions actually. I'm not sure if they are for Afzal or for Richard, so I'm happy for the two of you to decide who's going to answer them. Firstly, on ecological emergency as a whole, I know the strategy came out in September. I've heard that, I can't remember where I heard it now, but I've heard that the plan, so a more detailed document, is due out early-ish 2021. I wondered if we, and by we, I might mean this Scrutiny Commission, or I might mean all councillors, I'm not sure, can see it before it's finalised so that we can feed into it.
So if I can just start with that. Thank you, Richard, for answering the last question. I was just trying to envisage then the grassy verges actually being cut. So just to answer your question, Carla. So as you know, Bristol was the first major city in the UK to declare an ecological emergency. That was in February, and then we followed that up with a joint declaration with the Avon Wildlife Trust, with Ian Barrett and other citywide partners, and basically what we're essentially what we're planning to undertake here is that the ecological emergency action plan, that these measures are and aspirations are something that we want to agree and take forward. In terms of the timeline which you're talking about, that potentially is something that we'd like to bring to Cabinet by March, fingers crossed, next year. And that'll be part of our plans for council action to work collaboratively as part of the One City Ecological Emergency Strategy. It's something which we can't do alone. I mean, we appreciate there's a lot of work which will be undertaken, but I think the key thing is that you want to know what we're going to be doing. I think robust data really is critical. And I think so some of the key things that we'll be aiming to do initially will be again the evidence mapping, analysis, collating a wildlife index. I know that Councillor Negus was talking about Jonathan Swift, and I was just thinking about swifts, linnets, starlings. The numbers have been decimated in Bristol. We've got massive loss of habitat. So there's really no time to actually waste on this. So we're very keen that we're putting together the resources. We're putting together a 10-year strategy to actually work on this, but it has to be based on robust data. I pick up the previous point about taking the public along with us. Communication really is absolutely critical, and if we can show the benefits are tangible, I think that we can achieve progress quicker than we may think.
Paula, back to you.
Afzal, I'm really sorry, but that didn't. Everything you told me there, I already knew. I asked a specific question about whether we could have input on the plan before it came out, and you haven't answered that question at all.
So I think absolutely that is something which we can actually look at. Why not? I think this is something which we're all concerned about. It's not just down to one individual or one group. So certainly. So are you suggesting that we bring it back to scrutiny, or are you?
Well, I
talking
don't
about
know if the timings will work for when you've got a draft that needs feedback and when our next meeting is. But I was going to suggest that if the timing doesn't work out for that, perhaps a compromise could be that it is emailed to the members of scrutiny, and then we can feed in writing if we want to, and then that's better than nothing.
I mean, feedback really is critical, and I'm happy. I mean, we're now into Christmas. Essentially, we've got 3 months before it may potentially come to Cabinet. Happy to come back to Community Scrutiny Commission here and pick that up with yourselves. But I think at the very minimum, we can actually send that information over to yourselves to have a look and actually feedback. I think feedback really is critical.
Okay, great, thank you.
Can I butt in? I'm very pleased to hear that.
Asking, Carla.
Sorry, Anthony and Afzal, you spoke at the same time with the result that neither of you were audible.
So I just wanted to ask you, so are you happy with that response? Yeah, so I got to be really clear, but if that's the ask, happy to.
Well, as chair, I'm very happy with it, but it didn't happen with the environmental, the climate papers. We weren't allowed to see those before they went out. In fact, we're not allowed to see anything before it goes out. So I'm delighted that you've given the answer you have, and I welcome it with open arms.
Well, I think feedback really is.
Yeah, I agree.
Critical. Is it all right if I move on to my other questions?
Yep, sure.
Thank you. So these might be for the officers, possibly. I'm not sure. And I know there's a lot of background, but because we're tight on time, please refrain from giving the entire backstory. Glyphosate. So this Scrutiny Commission will know that the council did a trial on being glyphosate free in just a small number of areas of the city a few years ago, and the conclusion from that was not to stop using glyphosate. However, there's a target in the ecological emergency strategy to reduce it by a significant proportion. I think it's 50%. So I wondered if, as part of putting together that plan, that means the council will be reconsidering and yeah, potentially doing a new pilot or a new study to be more thorough than the previous one.
Do you like me to answer that, Councillor Sharp?
Yes, if you could pick that up, Richard. Yes, thank you.
So, Councillor Denyer, yeah. So the commitment in the One City climate ecological emergency is a reduction of 50% in the total use of pesticides, which would include glyphosate as being a suite. So it's broader than one chemical, which I think is good. So there is the work that was done a few years back, which was looking specifically at glyphosate, and we do have the benefits of that research. What I think we need to do is understand the quantum of use of pesticides across the city, not just Bristol City Council, but other players too. That is something we've recognised, and that's a piece of work that's going to start to understand that. And then what we'll be doing then is looking at where we are using pesticides, which would include glyphosate, and what are the best solutions to get the total use down by that quantum by the target. I think it's by 2030. So it's across the piece, and it's consistent with a substantive reduction in those pesticides. If we can go further, we can go further, but that's the current target. So it's a piece of work in train. Baseline first. Understand use, understand implications, seek out all the options for alternative, and then effectively come back with a robust response as to how we're going to own that target in Bristol City Council and deliver against it.
Okay.
Thank you. And one remaining one, if that's okay.
Just come back on that before you do your thing, because obviously you'll know that I'm very central to the glyphosate thing and always have been. Richard, I would give you one word of advice. Go back to that report that was done in 2012-13. Don't spend too much time in it, just tear it up and do something decent. Actually look seriously at the options, really look at the options, test them, look at what everybody else is doing. That was not done with the report that was around then. It was quite honestly astonishingly underwhelming. Carla.
Thank you. Final one, I don't really need an answer now, other than this is just a request to include this, or at least consider it in the Ecological Emergency Action Plan, and that is leaf blowers. So I've only relatively recently had it explained to me that leaf blowers are quite bad for biodiversity because they kill lots of insects in the leaf litter. In a way that raking doesn't necessarily. I was unaware of that. It also causes a lot of problems for people on the autistic spectrum and other people with sensory processing differences or disorders who find the extremely loud noises often going on right outside their house where there's no way that they can escape from it, really quite distressing and makes them unable to concentrate on their work or studies or whatever. And I had someone in my ward write to me about both of those issues recently. Which, yeah, I was previously unaware of. So I wondered if, as part of your work with the plan, you could consider the councils and contractors' current use of leaf blowers, and whether we really need to continue using leaf blowers, or whether we could switch to less destructive and noisy options.
Yeah, that probably takes a later answer. You're quite right, Carla.
That's fine.
Any other questions from people that haven't asked already? Right, Joe, I see you.
Yeah, I was on another subject, and I know this is kind of related to my ward, so I'll be careful, but it's around well, there's two things. It's around the issues of generally fly tipping and the impacts they have on habitats, and a sort of request that we look at that in a bit more detail, because there are people in the city or outside of the city who think that the countryside is a place for them to dump their unwanted stuff, and there is quite a lot of that in around Shirehampton. I'm sure South Bristol has that problem too at times. But the other thing is as well is the marshland between Lawrence Weston and the Avonmouth and Sevenside industrial area. It needs to be it needs a bit more loving care. It's quite an important piece of land. It has value. It's, you know, in terms of biodiversity, but it isn't really being monitored. It's and I think we could do a lot with it. I think we could actually bring people together to do things around that, because there are people working on the industrial area who go out there and have their lunch and are very happy to get involved. So could we please have some attention paid to that? Thanks.
Are you still there, Asal?
Yes, I am. Yes,
Oh, right.
yes.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Sargent. Absolutely, that's something that I'll take away, and I will respond to you via email as soon as possible. But absolutely agree with you. That is something which we do actually need to look at. Can I just ask, Richard, where are we currently with that?
So the point about fly tippings, I think it's really valid actually, because we talked before about this change, and nature's messy by its character actually, and some of the spaces that we're looking to encourage more nature will look to some people abandoned. So I think it's partly about presentation, it's partly about message. We don't want to make this problem worse, clearly, and there will be areas where it is tough. So I think that's part of the prioritisation thinking as to where maybe it is appropriate to start thinking about change in the first instance as opposed to catching up later. But I think it's a good point. In terms of the marshlands as you described at Shirehampton, if you don't mind, I'll have an offline conversation with you about that. Just it might help to give the answer I think that Councillor Shah's promising. I'm happy to speak to you directly just to see what the ideas are. There's undoubtedly programs going on. I don't know them all actually. So let's just talk and see if we can match a few ideas up. Is that okay?
Okay, thank you. I'd like to develop that a little, if I may. We're talking very much about reactive things, about trying to do things better, about not doing stuff, about preventing stuff. Can we talk a lot more about being proactive? Much as I love badgers and hedgehogs and things like that, the thing that's suffering very, very badly across the world are bugs. Really, you know, very, very small things that nobody thinks are very important at all. Have we really thought of trying to develop an interest in bug life around the city? We've got an opportunity with the zoo closing down on that site. Could we not set up an institute for bugs, the starting point of our ecology, and try and strengthen that aspect, particularly because I think it would appeal to young people. And that brings me on to the second thing. One of the biggest underused ecological opportunities in this city is our back gardens, and our front gardens for that matter. Why are we not doing more to really engage people in their own homes into something which is actually fundamental to the way forward for our lives? It would engage people. It should, to my mind, be exactly what the ecological program is all about, rather than just, you know, mechanical and, you know, certain other things. It's actually inculcating in people that joy of wildlife. How high up on your agenda is that?
Well, very high. Yeah, considering that many of the things that we have on our table, fruit and veg, are actually dependent on pollinators. You know, much of grocery, small businesses, things that we take for granted, honey. You know, bees play a critical role in the ecosystems and urban biodiversity too. So this really is critical. Like I said, we've got a 10-year ecological emergency strategy, and that is definitely something that that we are looking at in terms of the different boards which we do have. Again, happy to take this offline and have a more detailed discussion with you.
Well, you're amongst friends, so we can talk about these things.
Yeah. Really keen about having input once again. Can I just come in just very quickly? So I'm conscious of time. Carla, you make a very interesting point about leaf blowers. You talk about those on the autistic spectrum. So like, I've got a son who's autistic and he's just in the background, so I've just had to keep an eye on him. But,
near him, yeah.
But, yeah. So I absolutely get that point, and I think that's something that we need to actually consider how we can start making those adjustments. So thank you for raising that point. Councillor Negus, I don't know what I can say to you right now to actually, apart from saying that, happy to take this conversation offline, but also to, as we get closer to that due date in March, to see how we can start encompassing some of that in our forward thinking and aspirations.
Well, I'd like this opportunity to start now. That's why we're here. I'd like to talk about, by the time we get to March, to having a clear set of proposals and stimulants and interesting points. The Avon Wildlife Trust, of which I'm a member, have kits and toolboxes and all the rest for doing things around the city. Why are we not promoting that more? Actually, urban bees, I have to tell you, are one of the wildlife. It's a wildlife that got a slightly better chance than most. It's the rural bees which are seriously struggling. There's lots we can do within a city.
There is a lot that we are doing, and a lot more that we will do. Absolutely. So if I can ask Alex to chip in here. Alex, could you potentially
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Shaw. So,
provide some more.
I realise I didn't at the start of this meeting, which seems a while ago, I didn't introduce myself. So I'm Sustainable City and Climate Change Manager at the City Council, and also working with a new colleague to coordinate the council's response to the ecological emergency. And so I'll just take the opportunity to introduce Sarah Jackson, who's joined us in September to lead that work. But I think that one of the things that I just wanted to say was that the council has a role, but Councillor Negus has already highlighted that there are lots of other organisations in the city, and the Wildlife Trust and others. And so part of the approach of taking having the one city ecological emergency is ensuring that lots of organisations in the city are able to contribute to that kind of collective endeavour. And so what we're trying to do at the moment is work out, where does the council specifically have to respond, because only we can do, because it's our land or whatever. And then also, where can we add value to what others might be doing, enabling and supporting what they're doing, or amplifying what they're doing. I think that's what you were alluding to. So I think it's really important that we don't think we have to do everything, but clearly there are roles where the council has a specific, or indeed a very complementary role, and that's what we're just working through at the moment, part of that action plan. So we hear what you say, so thank you for that.
Okay. Eddie, did I see your hand, Graham?
No, I'm okay.
Okay, there's a third, in that case, there's a third sector, Alex, which I'm sure you're aware of, those people that are just not mindful of this sort of thing at all. That we, I think, duty is too strong, but we certainly have an ability and an incentive to try and stimulate their interest in trying to develop this, because this project is only going to work, as everybody has said, if as many people as possible are engaged in it. So, there is that third set as well.
Right. So we thank you for that. We hear that, and we'll reflect on that in the development of the action plan. Okay.
I'm not seeing any other hands up. Afzal, is there something that you would like to say about the joy of this, of being given this portfolio?
Absolutely. Well, yeah.
Sorry, just to point out, there are still a couple of hands raised. One from Martin. Graham, you've still got your.
I'm so sorry. And that's why you're here, Bronwyn. Thank you very much. Martin, I'm sorry. Before I bring you in, Afzal, let's just deal with the remaining questions. Martin and. Sorry, Martin first.
Okay,
then.
okay, and I think Richard wanted to tell us something. And
oh, okay, right. Well. Thank you.
But looking beyond the council, as you say, Alex, very true. And clearly, some of us have had and public have sent questions in already about verges, about parks, about wildlife, but also the city has ecologists in it. And above all, it has lots of schools, and there's an opportunity for school-led and citizen science-led measuring and monitoring and adopting of verges, and not just formal areas of land, but these informal bits of land. And the more children all over the city know what's going on and tell the story, the more families, parents, grandparents, you know, possibly some of the residents who haven't seen it change before, but hear why it's changing. It's getting the message out, telling the story, showing what the value is. So citizen science and school engagement is a really big opportunity, as far as I can see, all over the city. It's something that can happen everywhere.
Thank you. Was the other hand Richard's from it?
No, I think it was Graham, but I think that was left over from previously.
So
double checking, Sarah, I think you had your hand raised, but it's gone down now.
Okay, well, I'm going to go back to Afzal to make the closing remarks, because we're going to close this in a couple of minutes, Afzal.
Yeah, so Chair, I was just going to say to answer your question about being appointed to this position. Well, it's an opportunity to actually deliver for the city, deliver for our children, and also I think that it's extremely important that we also have diverse communities, those who have traditionally been on the front lines of suffering from the effects of climate change, and also changes in terms of ecology as well. Just to answer your question about what we're doing, so it's not about Bristol City Council owning this. It is a very collaborative approach, and rest assured, I mean, so there's a lot of mapping which we'll be doing. There will be an index that we'll be actually looking at and collating in terms of species. We're seeking input from other organizations, and seeking investments too. And there's a lot of, so in terms of our strategy goals, campaigns and projects, it's also looking at what's already taking place and what we could be doing better. And working with Avon Wildlife Trust, working with Natural History Consortium. So it's all about collaboration, but you know, it's not about Bristol City Council taking ownership of this, but you know, being at the forefront of this. More than happy to send you more information, but I can't. I have to mention that we're also going to be putting resources in for officers to ensure that they understand in the changes coming in terms of legislation, in terms of biodiversity net gain, and how land must benefit wildlife and plant life, and basically just reviewing what we're doing at the moment, which can be improved, but it's not going to be resolved overnight. But we do promise that you will see substantial results.
Well, they're going to be more than needed. Thank you very much, Councillor Shah. Thank you for your time, and for all the officers that attended. I'm sorry that we didn't get to you all, but thank you all for coming. We can let you fade out now, and we've just got a couple of very rapid items just to get through before we finish this evening, which I've now lost on my chart. The next one, I think, Bronwyn. I can't even get into my phone now.
Performance reports.
Yeah, I spoke to the leads about this. My personal view, and I've also spoken to OSM, my personal view is that, frankly, the performance information that we're getting is pretty suspect in view of what's been happening, and I don't think there's a great deal of merit in us taking too much time over that. Does anybody want to say something about that? Have I got this wrong? Martin, did I see your hand?
I was Thanks, Anthony. I was just going to say, I agree. I mean, so many of the things are probably not measuring normal years, normal months, normal quantities, whatever. But what we need to do is see where the blips are and see whether it's shifted. And that's going to take a while to gather that. So whatever definitions there were probably need to be explained away completely now.
Yeah. Okay. I did take this to Osm as I promised. Guy Collins went to speak to Mike Jackson and I believe Councillor Cheney, but I'm sorry, I may have got that wrong. And they both agreed that they would keep the performance standards going through, but I think there's a general understanding that they're a bit flaky at the moment, and for obvious reasons, there's nothing much we can do about it. So I think we just pass over that one. The next one is the work program. Again, I think it's an accurate document. I got no comments on it. Has anybody else got anything to say about that? No? Well, that's fairly straightforward. And I still can't get into the agenda, Bronwyn, for all my best efforts. So where are we now? That's the last point, isn't it, I think?
That's the close of the meeting.
Indeed it is. Okay, well, thank you all for getting through it with me. Be honest, I was very disappointed with the last topic. I just don't feel we got to grips with it very well at all. But I think the other two were extremely interesting, and I hope what's come out of it's been valuable to the people of Bristol. So thank you all for attending. I'm going to follow up some of these points, and I'll be liaising with you on this. And I wish you well, and I think that's the point to close the meeting. Thank you all. Goodbye now. Bronwyn, it's just you and me, I think. Thank you very much for that. Your help was incredibly valuable and very subtly done, if I may say so.
Thank you. Sorry, I was just on mute, but just a reminder, we're still broadcasting, I think.
Okay.
Tom, are we ending? No. I think Tom's left there, but I'll end the meeting so that we end the broadcast.
Okay, so does that mean you and I fade out as well?
I'm afraid so, but I can...
No, never mind, we'll speak soon, but thank you very much.
Wonderful, thanks very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.